Hey you folks, Quilly18 here, and welcome to another episode of our Unity project series called the Mostly Civilized Hex Engine, where we are trying to make the sort of shell of a game that you could use as the basis for perhaps your own sort of 4X-y kind of empire building game. We've got quite a few features in here at this point. We've got the ability to move our character around. This dwarf here does have the ability to plop down a city. When we do hit next turn, all cities will also spawn one extra dwarf unit, as you can see over here, although the new ones can't build cities. Only our original one has that sort of settler behavior. And hitting next turn does reset your movement capacity. What it doesn't do so far is process the rest of the queue. It resets your movement so that you can keep going, but that's about it. So a few things we still have to do for the queue, but what I really want to focus on right now is I want to focus on the multiple player logic, because one of the things that's going to be involved when we hit this, next turn button and we process the queue, some of the logic's going to involve running through different players, including local players and AI, and we'll put a placeholder in there for, remote players for multiplayer stuff, although I don't think we're going to be covering that in this particular tutorial. So what I want to do is a couple of changes. Currently in our hex map, okay, we have this hex map class that does a lot of stuff. And part of the reason it was doing a lot of stuff is because it sort of makes sense, and it might still make sense, I suppose, for the map itself to be aware of the units in the game. I think that's still kind of reasonable, right? But we did go ahead and split off a little bit of behavior to the turn controller over here, which mostly does the behavior that the map was doing a second ago and processing through a turn. And again, I think that's a good way to do it. Now, the question becomes, how do we want to track our players? Well, again, if the argument is that it makes sense for the map to be aware of all the units, and really the units belong to a player, then I guess the map will have the player sort of array. And I think that's a very fair and fine way to kind of think about it. You might want to offset things to like some other sort of generic, I don't know, like just master game controller, and it's the game controller that has a reference to the players and has a reference to the map and so on and so forth. But I don't think there's any specific win one way or the other. One of the things conceptually that goes on with like the map holding on to this data is, really the hex map represents the entirety of the game data in a very real sense. You can almost think, if we have this class, instead of it being called hex map, imagine this was called something like world, right? The world. Well, then it makes sense that everything sort of belongs beneath the world. So I think that the map object or the world object being sort of that top level data element is conceptually perfectly okay. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file, a new C# file over here, just an empty class. And I think I'm going to call this player, and that's going to be a-okay. And I'm going to trim off some of this stuff and bring that down like this. And so this class is just meant to hold on to the information from our for our players. I'll go ahead and include in sort of some of these basic elements over here. Maybe the link as well, because we might do some collection to array conversions or something of that nature. So this player itself is going to have what? Well, it's probably going to have something like public string player name. And again, we'll probably have some sort of, property here, but I don't think there's any reason at this time that the whole thing can't be perfectly public. I don't think there's any sort of internal checking we have to do based on, what people change their name to. So again, it could just be a purely public field. There's no difference one way or another right now. We can always make a change later if it turns out that we need to encapsulate this and do some error checking a little bit more safely. I think it makes sense, just like right now in our hex map, our hex map, I've probably missed it, has the list of all the units right over here, right? And I think we're going to change this. Yeah, I think we're going to change this. Now, I think this map, it still makes sense, because in a sense, there's still like a master list of all units. Well, that's an interesting question. Do we want to keep a master list of all units? We may not. It might not be something that actually matters in any way whatsoever. It's probably fair for the hex map to keep the master list of unit to game object map. That's probably okay. I think that's fine. But the idea is this particular hash set of units, I think we want to remove it from this. And so I think the idea is going to be something like this. We're going to have something like, we could probably make an array of players. So let's, you know what, we'll just make it public for now. We could always change it later on, but I think it's probably okay for us to say, listen, this is an array of all the players in the game. And it's probably also a good idea to track current player. Now, this might be something, I suspect we'll probably want some sort of accessor. It might want to do something. Current player. Like, in fact, I think that's an excellent idea. So, current player. And I guess we'll need to keep track of a private player underscore current player. Actually, I'll keep it a capital so it matches exactly. What do I usually do for this? I think the underscore is fine. So just the bookkeeper variant, the variable. So the get for this is perfectly fine to just return this current player. That's okay. And the setter has to do a couple of things. It is just going to set the internal current player to this value. That's perfectly okay. But what I want, since we're not going to keep this list of current units, like, I don't think we're going to have an array of master units, or maybe we will. We might put it back in. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to have this set to something like current player unit. Actually, we don't even want that, because we can just go current player.units, and that's going to be okay. I just wonder if we still need a list of all units. And I don't think we do. We've got the spawn unit at, which we probably have to reference a player at. You know what? Let's remove this. And I'm partially wondering, and the cities is going to be the same thing. I'm wondering if there's a better place to put that. We're going to remove the set of cities as well, which is going to break a bunch of things. So now we have players, we have current player. So you're going to have in here, public, we'll do it again where this is private hash set of units, private hash set cities, and we'll set up a public unit array units. I guess I should call it get units, or this can be an accessor perhaps. That's going to be fine. Get, and it's just going to return units.toArray, so we'll return a copy of that so that things don't get modified. We'll do this. So we're very, very, very similar to what was going on before. So people can get a list of all of a player's units and cities, but can't necessarily make a change directly. We'll probably have an add unit, an add city, or something like that, because there's going to be some bookkeeping involved. I think this is generally going to be, because we're not going to want to write to the array directly. That's going to be fine. Okay, so we've got this, we've got that. So now, if we were to try to compile, there would be tons of errors. One of the errors will be in the say spawn unit at, spawn cities at, because we don't have this units over here. So we're going to check, first of all, if the units map is null, and make sure to instantiate that. That's going to be okay. We'll spawn the units, and what we can't do is just directly add to the units array, and I don't want to do that anymore. Instead, in our player, I'm going to say something like add unit u, and its job is going to be to say units.add u. Like that. And same thing for city. City C, cities.add C. All right. So here we can say current player dot add unit. Done. And then the game object map still belongs to the hex map right now to babysit that, and that's going to be okay. Same thing here. We'll check to see if the map is null and then instantiate that. Because in our player constructor, we're going to have to make sure to set units is equal to new hash set, cities is equal to new hash set, like that. Maybe we'll force, when you spawn a player, you got to pass in a name. I think that's fair. Player name is equal to name. Boop. Okay. So, and unit. So here it's going to be current player dot add city. So just a tiny change so far, but not bad. Now, turn controller over here wants to get a list of units and cities. But right now it was getting a list of all units and all cities because, well, effectively we only had one player before. Now we have to make sure to get the one for the current player. But we can do that just by making a simple change without typoing and say current player dot units and current player dot cities. And then the final change we have to do is when we start over here, do all unit moves. Is there still something that's happening over here? I'm actually not sure this is still something that's happening over here, but let's say current for each unit u in current player dot units do moves. Any other compilation errors? No. Okay, guess not. But of course this still won't work because we don't actually create a player at any point. Now, generate map over here. We're going to need players before we generate the map. And the reason for that is we spawn a unit and spawn a city during the map generation. I mean, and that makes sense, right? We're always going to spawn units during the map generation because the players will have a starting location. But I think before we actually generate the map, we're going to want to have the players. And actually one of the processes of map generation will be for each player, plop down a settler somewhere reasonable. That kind of thing. So I think we can probably do something over here. Let's say generate players. And we'll pass it some sort of number. 6 over here. Okay, that's number of players we're going to be doing. And then void generate players int num players for qnum players. We are going to say something like players. Don't we have an array for players in here? Did I not do that? Yeah, there it is. Players. So we actually set players is equal to new array of players of a size num players. Players I is equal to new player. Player space plus I dot toString. I mean, you don't need the toString in there. I'm pretty sure C# will do the casting automatically. But there you go. So the players will be named player player 1 through 6, as opposed to player 0 through 5. Okay, so we set a list of those, and we set current player to be equal to players 0. The first player becomes the current player. I think if we were to go to run this, I think we'd be back to what we had before, which would be great. Let's give it a go. I can select this dwarf, move him over here, hit next turn. Both dwarves, or that dwarf spawns. This one's got his movement back. I can spawn a city, and I can keep you moving over here. Perfect. Okay, so we're back where we were, except now all the units and cities actually belong to players along the way, which is wonderful. What we don't do yet is handle like destruction of units or anything like that, I think that would be a good time for an event of some kind. So let's say we have because we don't have any events for this, do we? No. Feels like we should have a sort of player moved listener or something like that. How do we handle that? The unit view on unit moved. How do we register this? Unit object moved. How come I didn't see? Oh, because it's derived from map object. That's right. Okay, that's right. These events. I'm sure we have events in here. Units and cities are both map objects, and map object has a setup over here to be ready when something moves. Well, I think what we're going to do is add in a object destroyed delegate, which probably doesn't need anything in here. Probably not. So, delegate. So, on object destroyed. You know, or deleted or something like that. I mean, maybe destroyed is not exactly the right term because it does imply maybe, you know, something specifically, you know, destructive. But whenever, like, this object is supposed to be removed from the game / the map / whatever. We want to let people know. So we've got that. And then I guess we're going to have some sort of virtual public void destroy. So this is this object is being removed from the map / game. Don't know entirely everything that's going to result from this, but one thing for sure is if anyone is listening to this event, then we're going to make sure to trigger this event. And it'll probably happen first before anything else gets cleaned up because we might want to reference things. So it's going to want to remove itself from its hex and things like that. Now we do subclass the set hex over here to remove units from the hex and so on and so forth and add it. Right, because we don't have a generic remove thingy. So either this will have to be its own listener, or really what we're going to have is some sort of like destroy. So we're going to override destroy. We're going to call the base destroy, and then remove ourselves from the hex. Make sure that gets resolved. So the reason we're doing this is so that we can have so that we can clean up the map, right? Because it's one thing for the unit object itself, or the map object of any kind, to say, like, yes, I'm destroyed, which right now really doesn't do anything. But it's going to be important to remove the game object, because we can sort of delete the map object, or let's say it's a unit, right? I could destroy a unit by removing it, say, from the player's array and so on and so forth, which actually we probably want to do. So something like public void on unit destroyed. It's funny that we don't actually ask for a reference to this object here. I guess because when we implemented this, the thing it was calling, so when object move delegate gets called for a unit, it knows what unit we're talking about, because it just moves itself. But it would not surprise me if we would actually like to change this, and I will assume that that's what we're wanting to do, to like reference itself or something. Because yeah, it needs to know what is being destroyed. Map object. This. And so in the unit over here, or not the unit, the player, map object mo, we know that the map object in this case would have to be a unit because it's the only thing we're going to register on. So we can say something like units.remove. We can force cast mo to this. We could probably do things with templates and things, but this should work okay. So the idea, so we're adding a unit. We're going to say unit on object destroyed. We want to add a listener like this. So unit, whenever the units.destroy function gets called, on object destroyed is an event that has been registered. We're going to say, make sure you call our onUnitDestroyed function, which is going to be this, which is going to remove that unit from our set of units. So we're no longer going to iterate through this and have this dummy object in there. That's one part of it. And then the unit view over here is going to want exactly the same thing. It's going to want a public void on unit destroyed, which passes a map object. We actually don't need to do anything with this map object here because all it means is that we're going to make sure to destroy our very own game object over here. Although I say that, and yes, this does work, but there's one more thing that's got to be cleaned up here. The hex map itself, when we spawn a unit, it adds, this is what creates the view over here. But it also adds this unit to object map. This has got to be cleaned up. So you know what? Instead of having unit view, listen to this. We are going to do it in the map over here. This is going to be the listener for onUnitDestroyed. And what it's going to do, it's going to find a reference to the game object. So game object, like this. So this is a dictionary that maps from a unit to a game object. So we get the unit passed to us over here. We get the game object out of it. We are going to remove this unit and game object pair from our dictionary. And then we are going to destroy the game object, like so. We don't have to, I was going to say, we may want to clean ourselves up so that we no longer have the listeners, but this object's going to probably fall out of scope as is. I'm not 100% sure that everything will fall out of scope, so it might not be a bad idea to unregister all the events. I don't know, actually. I'm worried that the unit class, or rather the map object base, is going to have, these events are still going to be pointing to a script, our unit view script, and that they're going to maintain themselves in memory. Like, okay, in managed memory languages, you never explicitly destroy an object, right? We create objects by saying, you know, new blah, new unit, right? Something equals new unit. But we don't actually have a matching destroy unit function. The only thing we get like the closest we get to it is no longer having a reference to it. So our variable that used to point to a unit, we set it to null, or we remove that reference to that unit from an array. And when nothing points to it anymore, it gets cleaned up by the garbage collector and frees up that memory again. But I'm worried that we're going to have a bit of an like internal circular reference here. I guess nothing would be pointing to the unit. The actual unit itself, nothing would be pointing to it. If we had a reference to the unit from unit view, no, a garbage collector should pick this up. Okay, we should be fine. I was just worried that since the map object's still going to be pointing to a unit view as part of its event, that we might have some sort of weird thing, but I think we're actually okay. So we're just going to remove the reference to the game object from over here. And then destroy the game object. So that's going to remove the visuals of it. And the only reference to the unit should, in fact, be in the player code over here. We might want to have in, say, map object, some sort of Boolean in here that we don't set directly, but it's something like is being destroyed or is destroyed. I think that's a good idea. We're going to have a public Boolean is destroyed, because depending on the order of things, things might not get cleaned up the way we think, and we might want to put in checks. This is something that's quite common with game objects, but more importantly, it's going to come up with our mouse controller, because it's possible that we could have a unit selected in our mouse controller that is actually destroyed, and we could still point to it. It would still be a valid reference. We wouldn't be pointing to something that becomes null, but we would still be holding reference to something that's not applicable anymore. So this is going to be a public getter and a private setter. And we're just going to say over here, is destroyed is equal to true. And the reason I want to do that is in the mouse controller, we have selections, and basically I guess it's here. If selected unit not equals null, and selected unit dot is destroyed is equal to true. Again, I don't have to put in the true, but sure as hell makes it a lot more obvious what's going on. We are pointing to a destroyed unit. So we're just going to make sure to clear our selection before we go through and do any more logic for it. And the same thing will happen for city. If selected city is not equal null, but selected city is destroyed is true, then we null that out. Just clean that up before we go any further. Okay. I think we took care of a lot of important grunt work over here. So we've got events, we've got things, we've got this, we've got this. If a unit gets destroyed or city gets destroyed, I guess we don't do the city bit yet for the player. Then... And for the map, I guess we'll do that at the same time. So this would be on city destroyed. And again, with templating and various things, we might be able to avoid some of these casts. But overall, it's not too bad. City is remove, and we'll do the same thing here. If city on object destroyed, then call on city destroyed over here, just to remove it from this array. And our hex map over here. We'll do the same thing. I don't know if we have a listener, actually. I think we did not. Unit dot on object destroyed. We need to make sure to add our listener here to this on unit destroyed. And we're going to, oops, duplicate this for city. City, city. City to game object map. And really, these two, like this city to unit to game object map and unit to game object map, we actually might want to merge those into a single map object to game object map. Although Just saying that phrase out loud makes me want to not do it because it's super awkward. But it would remove a shocking amount of duplication from our efforts, our code over here. City dot on object destroyed plus equals on city destroyed, like so. And presumably we're going to compile. Chukka, chukka, chukka. Yep. So we don't have anything that destroys cities or units or anything at this point. But I think that we have everything put in there. So we've introduced the idea of a player. Now, in turn controller over here, this is where we're going to want to add some sort of logic to move to the next player. Which, I mean, there's really not much to it. I guess the question becomes, how do we want to address the players in here? Right? We've got this public array, and we've got a current player. We might want to... I mean, we could force a turn to a player ID. It might be handy to just get a reference to next player, or a function in here for, you know, advance to next player. You know what I think I'm going to do is do this. Public player next player, which is a getter. And this is going to be a little cumbersome, but current is equal to players dot... well, this is a regular array, so just doing a finding of the index is actually not very convenient. You know what? I'm not going to hold a reference to current player internally anymore. Instead, int current player index is equal to 0. And then when you want to know what the current player is, you just return players current player index, like that. And then we can have a public void advance to next player, or something. It's a little cumbersome, but I think it makes sense not to just have a setter for it. And so the idea is here is you just say current player index plus plus, but not exactly, plus 1, because what we have to do is take this whole thing modulo by the length of the players array. And the reason for that is if we were at the final player, so if we've got 6 players, then the indexes go from 0 to 5. If this was 5, plus 1 is equal to 6, which is out of bounds. And if we modulo here, it'll stay within bounds. So we can just say current index, current player index this, and that's going to be okay. And then this will return the next one over here, which I guess is fine. And it means our turn controller can just say something like, for our map, hex map dot advance to next player. The other thing to remember is we could keep track of the current player in turn controller over here, but I think this is okay. Again, there's very logically the idea that when we have to save our game, what we do is we save hex map. We tell hex map, yo, save yourself. And that will include saving what the current player is. And, you know, all bits that are inside. I think it really makes sense that hex map is the root of all of our actual data over here. In particular, turn controller is not a data class, right? It's a mono behavior, it's attached to a component. It doesn't have to be. It could be a pure class. But it's never, with controller in its name, it's never meant to be a data class. It's meant to be a class that controls data classes and does things with them, but doesn't actually store data. So this will advance to the next player. Now, what we have to do in the next episode is we'll introduce units based on player and want to change. We want to make it so that you can only control your own players, your own units over there. One of the things that'll happen over here with our player is there'll be some sort of like some sort of public enum player type local AI remote or something like that. And then public player type type is equal to, by default, player type dot local, I guess, or something like that, right? So as you advance to the next player, the turn controller will say, are we a local player? Yes. Okay, then we've just got to stop and wait for inputs. Are you an AI player? Oh, then instead of waiting for inputs, we're just going to pass you off to the AI subsystem who will take all the moves. And if you're a remote player, then it means we're not going to implement this, but it means we're going to be waiting for, you know, some remote player to take their moves and things like that. We'll also have to consider things like, you know, vision, line of sights, fog of war, that sort of thing in the future. But yeah, we're gonna end this video here. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and I'll see you guys next time. I want to say thank you to everyone who keeps this channel going and all the August Patreon supporters, including these Mic Check supporters: Yukofin, Eric Sumner, Tiburon, Mighty Mix, Pavel Zdanov, Drazion, Michael McClintock, Aaron Toibson, Rarzkal, Tinsy, Jesper Bisgard, Julien Gelafond, Marius Fieldvold, Speedy Savant, Steven Stager, Thomas Oberson, Jason Yanity, Stephen Bonnerman, Kale the Quick, Neil Blakey Milner, and everyone who's watched, shared, favorited, and subscribed to this channel. Thank you so, so much.